Have you ever watched your husband leave for work each morning looking competent, confident, and capable, only to come home a few hours later emotionally unavailable, overwhelmed, or withdrawn? Perhaps you found yourself thinking, if he can manage a demanding career, interact with coworkers, solve complicated problems, and navigate the outside world, why does life at home feel so incredibly difficult? If you've asked yourself that question, you are far from alone. It is one of the most common questions I hear from wives whose husbands have level 1 autism, and it is one of the greatest sources of confusion for women experiencing Cassandra Syndrome. One of the biggest misconceptions surrounding what is often called high-functioning autism is the belief that because someone appears highly capable in public, they must also have relatively few challenges in private. Friends, coworkers, neighbors, and even extended family often see a man who has built a successful career, manages his finances, arrives at work on time, and appears intelligent and responsible. From the outside, it can look as though everything is functioning normally. Because of this, people naturally assume that any struggles within the marriage must be ordinary relationship problems, or perhaps even the fault of the spouse who is expressing concerns. Yet the reality inside many neurodiverse marriages is far more complicated. The support needs have not disappeared simply because they are difficult to see. They have become invisible, and invisible struggles are often the hardest ones to explain. The workplace and the home require very different kinds of functioning. Most jobs provide structure, predictability, clearly defined expectations, and routines that remain relatively stable from day to day. There are written policies, scheduled meetings, objective goals, and rules that guide social interactions. For many autistic adults, these environments provide a framework that allows them to succeed, because they know what is expected and how success will be measured. Home, however, is almost the opposite. Family life is filled with interruptions, emotional conversations, unexpected changes in plans, children's needs, household responsibilities, sensory stimulation, competing priorities, and countless moments that require flexibility. What feels warm, spontaneous, and emotionally connecting to one spouse may feel chaotic and neurologically exhausting to the other. Consider the experience of Sarah, whose husband had built a successful career as an engineer. His colleagues admired his attention to detail, his reliability, and his ability to solve complex problems. Whenever they attended company events together, co-workers commented on how personable and engaging he seemed. Sarah often returned home from those gatherings feeling confused and deeply hurt. She would wonder why strangers received the warm, conversational version of her husband, while she often received silence. After work, he would come home, sit quietly in his favorite chair, avoid conversation, and seem irritated by even simple questions about his day. For years, Sarah concluded that he simply did not enjoy being with her anymore. It was only after he received an autism diagnosis that they began to understand what had actually been happening. Throughout each workday, he had been carefully monitoring his facial expressions, interpreting social cues, maintaining conversations, tolerating uncomfortable sensory input, and consciously masking many of his autistic traits. By the time he arrived home, his nervous system had become completely depleted. His withdrawal was not a sign that he loved his coworkers more than his wife. It was evidence that home had become the only place where he no longer had the energy to continue performing. Understanding this did not erase Sarah's loneliness. She still longed for emotional connection and meaningful conversation. However, it did change the story she had been telling herself. Instead of believing that her husband was intentionally withholding affection, she began recognizing that much of what she interpreted as rejection was actually neurological exhaustion. That realization did not solve every problem in their marriage, but it allowed them to approach those problems with greater compassion instead of assuming the worst about each other's intentions. While many autistic husbands are quietly struggling with sensory overload and the mental effort required to navigate daily life, many wives find themselves carrying a completely different burden. They become the invisible managers of the family. They remember appointments, organize schedules, coordinate children's activities, plan holidays, purchase birthday gifts, maintain relationships with extended family, monitor household finances, anticipate future problems, and keep countless moving parts functioning without anyone noticing the enormous amount of mental energy involved. In many marriages, they also become responsible for tracking everyone's emotional well-being, sensing tension before anyone else notices it, preventing conflicts whenever possible, and repairing relationships after misunderstandings occur. Over time, this invisible emotional labor becomes so familiar that they stop noticing how much they are carrying until they reach complete exhaustion. One woman described her life by saying, "I don't feel like a wife anymore. I feel like the operations manager of our family." Another quietly admitted that if she stopped planning ahead for both herself and her husband, nearly every aspect of their household would begin to unravel. Neither woman resented helping her husband simply because he was autistic. What wore them down was the feeling that no one else recognized the weight they carried every single day. Friends complimented them on having organized homes and successful children, never realizing how much invisible effort it took to hold everything together. This invisible emotional labor is one of the defining characteristics of Cassandra Syndrome. The pain extends beyond the absence of affection or emotional intimacy. It comes from living in a state of constant vigilance. Many wives become accustomed to thinking several steps ahead, anticipating sensory overload, preventing misunderstandings, managing crises before they develop, and protecting everyone else's emotional well-being while quietly neglecting their own. Eventually, they become so focused on everyone else's needs that they lose touch with their own exhaustion. The loneliness they experience is not simply the loneliness of being physically alone. It is the loneliness of feeling emotionally unseen while carrying responsibilities that no one else fully appreciates. Meanwhile, the autistic husband may be experiencing a completely different kind of struggle that remains equally invisible. Many autistic adults live with nervous systems that process sensory information far more intensely than most people realize. A television playing in the background, children talking at the same time, bright kitchen lights, strong cooking smells, the hum of household appliances, unexpected questions, or last-minute changes in plans may each seem insignificant on their own. However, together they create a steady accumulation of sensory input that the brain must continuously process. Imagine trying to solve difficult mathematical equations while several radios are playing at once. Someone repeatedly changes the instructions, bright lights shine into your eyes, and multiple people expect you to maintain a pleasant conversation. For many autistic adults, this approximation comes surprisingly close to what ordinary family life can feel like during periods of sensory overload. Jennifer struggled for years to understand why her husband disappeared into the bedroom almost every evening after work. She interpreted his behavior as emotional abandonment and concluded that he simply did not want to spend time with her or the children. During counseling, however, he finally found words to describe what had always felt impossible to explain. "My brain feels loud," he said quietly. "By the time I get home, every sound feels bigger than it should. If I don't get away from everything for a little while, I feel like I'm going to explode." Jennifer realized that what she had experienced as rejection had actually been his attempt to prevent conflict. Rather than forcing himself to remain engaged until he became irritable, he had instinctively sought solitude because it was the only strategy he knew for calming an overwhelmed nervous system. Together, they developed a simple routine that allowed him 20 minutes of uninterrupted decompression after work before joining the family. The change did not eliminate every difficulty in their marriage, but it significantly reduced misunderstandings because each partner now understood the meaning behind the other's behavior. Another hidden challenge common among autistic adults is alexithymia, a condition involving difficulty recognizing, identifying, and expressing emotions. This does not mean an autistic person lacks feelings or does not care deeply about those they love. In fact, many experience emotions with remarkable intensity. The challenge lies in translating those emotional experiences into words. When a wife asks, "What's wrong?" and her husband answers, "I don't know," she may hear indifference or avoidance. In reality, he may genuinely be unable to identify the complex mixture of emotions occurring inside him. His nervous system may register distress, anxiety, frustration, or overwhelm, without providing him with the emotional vocabulary needed to explain what he is experiencing. As a result, she feels shut out while he feels pressured to answer questions he cannot honestly answer. Both leave the conversation feeling misunderstood, even though neither intended to hurt the other. Recognizing these neurological differences does not erase the emotional wounds that have accumulated over years of misunderstanding. It does not excuse neglect, dismissiveness, harsh words, or behavior that causes genuine harm. Compassion should never require ignoring accountability. However, understanding the neurological patterns underneath repeated conflicts often changes the way couples interpret each other's behavior. Instead of automatically assuming that hurtful actions reflect selfishness or a lack of love, both partners can begin asking different questions. A wife may pause long enough to wonder whether her husband's nervous system has become overwhelmed rather than assuming he simply does not care. Likewise, an autistic husband may begin asking whether his wife has been carrying the family's emotional responsibilities by herself for far too long. These questions shift the conversation away from blame and toward understanding, creating opportunities for genuine collaboration instead of repeated conflict. At the same time, it is essential that wives do not disappear in the process of learning about autism. Many women spend years educating themselves about sensory processing, executive functioning, communication differences, and emotional regulation, while quietly ignoring their own growing burnout. They become experts at understanding their husband's nervous system while losing awareness of their own. Yet a healthy neurodiverse marriage cannot thrive if only one partner's needs receive attention. The emotional needs of the neurotypical spouse deserve just as much compassion and validation as the neurological needs of the autistic spouse. Both nervous systems matter. Both experiences deserve to be understood. Both individuals deserve support. One of the healthiest realizations many wives eventually reach is that compassion and responsibility are not the same thing. You can understand why your husband becomes overwhelmed without believing it is your job to prevent every instance of sensory overload. You can empathize with executive functioning challenges without becoming another adult's executive functioning system. You can appreciate communication differences without accepting chronic emotional neglect. Healthy love includes empathy, but it also includes boundaries. It allows both partners to contribute to the relationship in ways that promote mutual growth rather than quiet resentment.
Hey guys, this is Mark. Some of you may not know that I have a lot of books on Amazon. So if you like my videos, you'll like my books. I have several for ASD spouses, for NT spouses, and for the neurodiverse couple. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this link. Feel free to click on that link and see what's available. I'm sure you'll find something that applies to you. So if you're struggling in your neurodiverse marriage, help is available, one click away.